Howdy folks, it's Gabriel Science here again. We're going to be covering the rest of Chapter 4 involving sex and gender orientation. I think we left off here, the last point being um sex differences and gender identity. The last point here we talked about the Aztec gender roles. So just to clarify and to restate, a gender role is the set of expected behaviors or attitudes or jobs associated with being male or female. Um, so you may imagine there's kind of a lot of stereotypes associated with different gender roles. The easiest one would be to say that, especially in American society, but in a lot of societies, the females are usually more associated with sedentary, stay-at-home sort of jobs. Especially in the 40s and 50s, it's really easy to think about pretty much every secretary being female or every nurse being female and doctors or businessmen being males. Of course, we know that that is no longer true, and that's changing quite a bit. It's pretty exciting to see how many women there are in STEM right now and getting graduate degrees, and I fully expect that within the next couple of decades we'll have actually the majority women majority women be in leadership positions in psychology. So that's pretty exciting. And that's pretty much the only uh, administrative area that I am intimately familiar with. So there we go. I left you with a question. What are some gender roles in our own society? I just pointed out a couple of those, but I'd really like to encourage you to think about them. The wonderful thing about thinking about the gender roles in our society is that you also get to think about whether or not they have any meaningful purpose. So, to be in being objective, it's important to note that it does make sense in certain situations that males would be better equipped for some jobs and females would be better equipped for other jobs. Um, I suspect, for example, it may be easier uh, um, for caregivers or for people who deal with folks who are experiencing trauma or very difficult emotions. It may be easier for females to take those jobs just because uh, there are many cases in which people may be uncomfortable speaking with men or interacting with men if they're already in a compromised emotional state. But maybe that'll change in the future. So when you're thinking about this question, make sure you also think about whether or not there is any real benefit to the gender roles that we have in our society, or whether they're just kind of arbitrary. Okay, the next topic is gender differentiation. I don't think I required this as a vocab term just because it starts getting a little bit too overly specific, but gender differentiation is just the way in which the two different genders, or just maleness and femaleness, uh, sets themselves apart from each other. So the way I think about gender differentiation is how children are kind of raised to um, to interact and play with each other. So boys generally will have a lot of playtime that might be a bit rough, and girls do have that rough and tumble playtime, but they might be um, kind of led away from that. Girls are likely, I think, are more likely to be introduced to intellectual ventures a little bit earlier than boys, and reading a little bit earlier than boys. Boys have a higher likelihood of risky sort of play here. So here we got a bunch of boys playing just right on the precipitous edge of a apparently pretty tall waterfall. Of course, boys are given toys that are associated with more uh, male-oriented jobs, like being a construction worker or an engineer. Over here we have girls who you've got them in a playroom, and they're all kind of dressed up. At least two of them are dressed up kind of like a princess, and they've got. I mean, some of these toys are a little silly. I definitely see a number of baby carriages, but I think this might be a kitchen and washer dryer. And of course over here we got another pretty princess set up with the girl and lots of different toys, and they're all very extravagantly pink. So yeah, I mean that's a pretty clear demonstration of how gender differentiation starts. You may imagine that a better way to raise your child is to let them pick the colors and toys that they want to have. You kind of have to pick the colors for them when they're babies, but you can imagine that as a child or a baby that picks up everything around them constantly, by inherently telling them that they're supposed to play with these sorts of toys or those sorts of toys, they're supposed to like this color versus that color, you're going to give them some pretty deep-seated notions on who they're supposed to be. So what expectations do you have for men versus women? So we just talked about this. Gender roles are not necessarily wrong or sexist. Some of them are beneficial for the growth of mankind. Some of them make sense just based off of our different biologies or our different demeanors of the two sexes. But another question there is, another point to make there is that it makes sense for society to divide people into more specialized roles. The reason that the human race, or one of the reasons that the human race has been able to advance so far, is its ability to specialize, delegate, and communicate. So consider that gender roles are not a totally unhealthy thing for society to have. It makes sense for people that are similar, in this case similar by gender, would pick up similar responsibilities, and that may just be something that we naturally do. However, gender roles can bring about inequality, of course, so not all men want to be warriors and not all women want to be homemakers. It makes sense, too, that when we were talking about the gender pay gap, that if women are consistently associated with these homemaker sort of jobs, that they may be consistently trained or indoctrinated to pick up those good Samaritan jobs that may not pay as well as some of the other jobs. So there you go. Let's talk about reversing gender roles. There's some interesting stuff we have at the end of the slides for you there if you're interested. The reason I'm interested in reversing gender roles is because there are definitely a number of gender roles that don't need to exist, that we've kind of accepted as a society but are not totally required. So there are two here that are changing over time. I got this data from the US Census. These two are stay-at-home fathers versus working moms. So the amount of stay-at-home fathers increased by 25,000 from 2010 to 2011. I can only expect that that increase has gotten greater in more recent years. So I'd be happy to update this whenever the new census data comes out. And of course, working moms have increased by 6% from 2010 to 2011. I'm sorry that you can't directly relate those figures just because the census did not present the direct number there, but I suspect 6% is much greater than 25,000. So you can imagine too that women in the workplace is kind of a movement that got started quite a while ago now, and so it is becoming more and more and more popular. And 6% of the United States population is way more than 25,000. The idea of being a stay-at-home father is something that is newer. I clearly remember maybe 10 or 15 years ago, people asked the question, how would you feel if your wife made more money than you? A lot of guys would feel very emasculated. A lot of guys would be very uncomfortable with that. I can tell you right now that kind of my ideal dream life was to be a stay-at-home father, but I also wanted to be a professional and be responsible and be able to make money, so here we are. We'll see whether my girlfriend works hard enough so that I can be a stay-at-home father, but I don't think that she wants to be a totally working lady too. I think we both really want to rear our kids, and that's wonderful because rearing your kids it's probably a really great experience. I'm excited for that. Okay, so to finish off this slide, stay-at-home fathers, both of these have some data associated to them from a research paper, again linked here at the end of the slides. Stay-at-home fathers reported feeling socially unsupported. They had difficulty joining mothers' play groups, so makes sense that you want to make sure that your kid has folks to play with. And inevitably, if you're going to take your kid to play with a bunch of children, you're going to want to socialize and be friends with the other parents that are there. And so because most of the parents right now, most of the stay-at-home parents are going to be ladies, it may make sense that maybe fathers would have trouble connecting with those groups. And in addition, I will say this, you may imagine that women are the ones that are most hurt by indoctrinated gender roles, but consider that women are also a large part of perpetuating those gender roles. In fact, it's probably around 50-50 for men and women, because they are the ones who raise children, and well, they have opinions too. And so there are reports here in this paper that mothers are less willing to accept a father into the social group. It makes sense that you might want to have a group that's just all women, but maybe you should accept a group that's all parents. Of course, follow-up there is that there's awkwardness making friends. In women, there are similar social issues going on in the workplace, so trying to be accepted as an equal, as a responsible person. Women, of course, face inequality in terms of wage and promotion discrimination, and there's harassment. Of course, it's unsurprising and fairly terrible to know that there's quite a bit of sexual and gendered harassment in the workplace still. Just about everyone who ever takes up any job has to go through some sort of training in reference to that. So hopefully we can work together to make that situation better over the next couple of years. Let's talk about gender identity. So gender identity is a term that I will require you to know because it really hammers home the idea that your gender is a personal choice. So your gender identity is your sense of being male or female or some combination, some point in between. You may wish to believe that being male and female is on a scale from male to female, but a better way to think about that in actuality is to think of you as a person having two scales, how many masculine traits you have and how many feminine traits you have. And you also need to be aware that there is nothing better or worse about being more masculine or more feminine. If you want to feel proud about a quality of yours, feel proud about being just who you are. Feel proud about how confident you are in your person. That's something that may be difficult for people to get used to or to pick up, but it really is the best way to live. If we try to think about ourselves as being dominantly masculine or dominantly feminine, we are inevitably comparing ourselves to each other or to the social roles that we are kind of given. And I promise you that the best way to live your life is not to compare yourself to other people or to any arbitrary scale of success, but instead to compare yourself to yourself. Excuse me, and to conclude there, to compare yourself to yourself allows you to compare yourself to your past self and try to be a better person instead of being a better male or better female. That being said, it does feel good to feel masculine and feminine, but reference what I just talked about. So at the conclusion of this slide here is a question. How do we attain our gender identity? We've talked about this before, but I would like to ask you kind of to think about this personally. Where does your feeling of being a man or a woman come from? Do you feel as though it's important to feel like a man or a woman? Do you feel as though maybe sometimes you don't feel totally male or totally female? And how do you feel about having traits from the opposite gender? Does the idea of two sliding scales for gender for every person make sense? Does it make sense that maybe it's a good thing to have feminine traits if you're a man or masculine traits if you're a woman? I can tell you that in terms of romance, men like women who have masculine traits and women like men who have feminine traits in terms of long-term relationships. Oh, I forgot I did this. I had fun making that thing spin. Look at it go. Alright, social learning theory. Social learning theory is, to put it basically, the idea that we learn by watching. We learn who we should be by watching our parents especially, but just by watching other people generally. So, here we got lots of examples of ways in which children are copying their same sex parent. The theory here is also that we learn social behavior by imitating and being rewarded or being punished for that behavior. So you can easily imagine a father rewarding or punishing their kid for being a man or not being a man. It's very unfortunate, but I can clearly picture many, many dads that tell their kids, big boys don't cry. And, the reason for that is not so much that big boys don't cry, because crying is good for you. Maybe not to do it all the time so that you can't do your job, but crying is good for you. In reality, the reason a lot of men tell their children that big boys don't cry is because they're uncomfortable with it and they don't know how to deal with it, and they themselves feel as though men should not cry. But that's a mistake. That's bottling up your emotions. And the same sort of thing happens with women and their own daughters. I'm sure that you could come up with your own stereotype. I think the one that I've seen most often is the way that girls dress. So there are a number of mothers that I have noticed would point out, if the girl dresses a little bit too masculinely or a little bit too androgynously, just wanting to wear a t-shirt and jeans all the time, they may feel uncomfortable that their daughter is not girly enough and try to push them towards wearing more skirts or something like that. Again, I want to try to give you as much information as I can from my own personal experience, but not overstep my bounds as being a male. So if there are any people who feel that example made sense to them, let me know. And if you feel there are better examples there, also let me know, and I'd be happy to incorporate that into the PowerPoint moving forward. So I just gave you two examples of situations where social learning theory is troublesome, but there are definitely examples of social learning theory that are not troublesome. So I would like you to think about this. Can you think of examples of social learning theory that are good? Positive examples where children copy their parents. And we get to finally this question. I think I've posed it a couple of times, but what does it mean to be masculine or feminine? I really, really would like you to pause here, answer this question, think about it carefully. I'll give you 3 seconds, but 3, 2, 1. But on this next slide, I have a wonderful video. I think it's total 20 minutes long, and I've set this link here at a certain time in the video so that you only have to watch 3 or 4 minutes of the video if you want to. But I really encourage you to watch this. This is a video clip from I think it was a longer documentary. It might have been just a 20-minute documentary about this lady and this man here. So actually, these two are the same person. This lady took it upon herself to investigate what it's like to be a man, and she went to a voice coach and went to a dresser and went to a barber and did everything that she could to look like a man, and in their own words, infiltrated male society. She joined she participated in a number of male activities. She joined a male bowling group. She tried to go on a number of dates with women. She went to a male bonding camp. That was interesting. I had never heard something like that, but she ended up writing a book, and the video itself is pretty interesting and exciting. If anyone would like to read the book, I would really encourage that. The lady seemed like a very, very intelligent woman who was able to come up with some pretty dang cool insights into what it's like being a man. So if you just want to do the slides, go ahead, go through this link. You can just copy and paste it from the slides. Watch those last couple of minutes in the video. I'll wait here for 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay, so let's talk about masculinity and femininity. I've kind of already talked about these, so I'll just read through the slides efficiently. Make sure not to let anyone tell you who you should be. That includes you telling yourself who you should be. Being masculine and feminine may be positive for you, but don't let yourself get caught up on how you should be. Instead, be proud of yourself for who you are. Confidence comes from your own personal pride, not from being something or being someone. Okay. I think this goes through the same idea. Instead of trying to be a man, try to be a good person. Or instead of trying to be a woman, try to be a good person. Important values are universal. Good people are loving and reasoning, are creative and empathetic. They have drive and responsibility. Being masculine and feminine can feel good, but if you think about it, a lot of different traits of being masculine or feminine are interchangeable because they are based on some of these universal values, right? So think about, for example, males are they're supposed to be the ones who support the family, and women are supposed to be the ones who nurture the family. But in reality, both of those come from being loving and responsible for your family. They may have been socialized to look differently, but the same point is there. You're caring for people and supporting them. So, yeah, just try to be a good person. Okay, I think this is the last section in this PowerPoint, sexuality. It might be a little bit of a long one, I'm not sure. So let's get started. We've already talked about how males and females are slightly different in terms of how they look in nature. Males are often more bombastically colored and shaped just because they need to attract a female. Sexual selection is the process by which animals, and people included, choose their sexual partners. It's influenced by biology and culture, and there are long-standing ideas that affect sexual selection. In nature, sexual selection comes from and is a big part of evolution. So ladies choose males that are the most naturally viable, males that are the most healthy, strong, able to provide, and part of that is that look the best. Because looking the best means that you are able to feed yourself well and probably could take care of the family very well too. In humans, sexual selection works in much the same way. We'll talk more about that here in a moment, but I'd like you to go ahead and click on this video and give it a watch. It's about how people may be more or less attractive just depending on the circumstances that you talk to them in. So I'll give you 3 moments to pause this video and watch that one. 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, so what makes someone attractive? Let's try ask the question more specifically. Why is having a nice car sexually attractive? Well, we just mentioned that being someone who can provide for themselves indicates that you are someone who could provide for another person. And so if you have a nice car, it means that you are a person of means, which makes the opposite sex attracted to you. So what else makes someone attractive? How much of attraction comes from these sexually chosen traits, from these evolutionarily based qualities? That's an interesting question to ask yourself and try to think about. Okay, so let's talk about, therefore, evolutionary psychology. Evolutionary psychology is the study of how our behavior and minds and personalities are changed in adapted ways over time due to natural selection. Gosh, that sounds confusing. Well, let's simplify it. Evolutionary psychology is a branch of psychology that seeks to explain how we work based off of evolutionary reasons. The word adaptive means something that is beneficial for an organism, such as how ducks have webbed feet. Having webbed feet is adaptive for a duck because it helps them swim around a lot and helps them get their food more easily. Natural selection is the evolutionary process by which organisms reproduce or die off based on how well they are adapted to their environment. So natural selection, kind of the idea of the strongest survive. So let's restate that evolutionary psychology definition. Evolutionary psychology is a study of how our behavior and mind are changed in adaptive ways over time due to natural selection. It's trying to explain our behaviors based off of evolutionary benefits. So to go a little bit further on natural selection, sexual selection, we were just talking about this, is a form of natural selection. And it might be a good idea to think about what adaptive traits increase a person's likelihood to be sexually selected. We just talked about what makes someone attractive. Having a car means you have means that you are sexually selectable, but what other things make you attractive to a romantic partner? I've got here a picture that's not necessarily about sex, but it is about adaptive traits. So you can see that bird beaks, these are 4 different kinds of the same species of bird, a finch, but they have slightly different beaks. And the reason they have slightly different beaks is because those beaks are adapted to get at whatever food the bird prefers. So a pointy beak might be good for cutting, for getting into these little seed pods. A longer, narrower beak that would be good for getting into the narrow flowers of a cactus plant. A short, sharp beak for nipping off the buds of a plant, or a longer, narrower beak that can hold a stick so that a bird can jab at insects and grab them using this needle from a cactus. This woodpecker finch has a very interesting method of gathering food that I've just described, but if you'd like, I really encourage you, go to Google, type that in, see if you can find some videos about how they work. Alright, let's talk about causes of sex. What makes people have sex? There's a lot of different reasons people have sex, and there's a lot of things that can influence you into having sex. Of course, estrogens and testosterones, the sex differentiated hormones, affect the ways in which we want to have sex. Men with more testosterone that you can get from exercising or from being at a certain age are going to be more sexually driven. On the other side, women who have more testosterone and estrogen are going to be more sexually driven. For example, part of the reason women have a higher or lower sexual drive depending on the point they are in their menstrual cycle is because the testosterone and estrogen that they have coursing through their body is different depending on the point they are in their menstrual cycle. So it's interesting to notice how your personality is in a big way affected just by what your body is doing and what it wants you to do. Makes sense that your body would push you to have sex when you are more fertile, or for guys push you to have sex when you are most able to be a parent. There are, of course, a number of cultural reasons and emotional reasons why people would have sex. Romance, stress, social pressure. We could talk about those forever, but a big reason people have sex, a big reason especially younger folks have sex, is because they have been drinking. And so how does drinking make you want to have sex? Drinking reduces your inhibitions. That's not a big surprise. It increases risk-taking, but it can affect you in another way. So down there I've got blood effects. Drinking can help your blood flow a little bit more easily through the body by relaxing your muscles. And so that can cause blood to go to your genital areas. And for men and women, having more blood at your penis or your vagina, I'm not sure if the vagina is the correct term to use there for wherever blood goes, but having more blood in your genitals makes you more ready for sex and want to have sex, because again, if your body is in a position to feel something, you will mentally feel that. So in this case, it's not that you get horny, therefore your genitals engorge, but it's the other way around. Your genitals engorge and you start feeling horny. Another point to make there, however, is that too much drinking can be detrimental for sex, because if you dehydrate yourself, you will be less able to get aroused and perform any sex act. It'll be very, very difficult for, well, we don't need to get into that level of specificity. Suffice to say that dehydration makes sex more difficult. And of course, you need to be able to stay you need to not be exhausted to accomplish sex, and so too much drinking and dehydration can prevent you from being in a good physical state to accomplish the sex act. Of course, sex is also a very beneficial stress relief mechanism. People that have sex on somewhat of a regular basis are happier, especially if they have that sex in a meaningful way, with a meaningful partner. You also can be slightly healthier. Your immune system is actually slightly better when you have sex more often. Men have a little bit more estrogen and testosterone when they have sex. Women have a little bit more testosterone and estrogen when they have sex often. Both things make them just a little bit more of who they are. And of course, the last point here, smells make you have sex. That kind of sounds gross. Well, actually, humans have a form of pheromones, just like animals do. So if a woman smells the BO of a man that they're interested in, she is more likely to get sexually aroused, and something very, very similar happens for a man and a woman's BO. So we do have major pheromones, just like animals do. They don't work exactly the same way. You can't often smell someone across the room, and if you can, that's probably going to be a turn off. But feel free to go ahead, click on this video, and learn just a little bit more about the causes of sex for women. And I believe it's more about the way in which estrogen affects women over time. Okay, next up. Oh, actually, I just remembered one more point that I would like to make about estrogen and testosterone. So if you look up information about estrogen, what you get is a lot of very informative, positive videos by women and for women. They're explanatory, and they do a lot to try and make sure that women feel comfortable and understand how their bodies work. If you look up testosterone, you get a lot of advertisements. You get a lot of companies trying to tell you that you don't have enough testosterone, that you are not enough of a man, and that therefore you should buy testosterone supplements. I would like to tell you that the idea that most men are testosterone weak, they don't have enough testosterone, is total garbage. The idea that men are lacking in testosterone started whenever I believe it was the FDA allowed people in the United States to advertise medication. And so what happened is there was a study that showed that as you get older, the amount of testosterone in your body decreases, and that is part of a natural, healthy aging process. But the companies took that and rolled with it and said, well, if you have less testosterone, you may feel a reduced sexual drive, you may have reduced muscles. And the point there is no, you don't. What's going on there is as you get older, you naturally have fewer muscles and less sex drive. That's not a bad thing. That just means you're getting older, and it's something that you should embrace as part of getting older. So that's kind of an unfortunate way in which men are socialized towards their gender in a negative way. You're supposed to always be sort of this Herculean He-Man sort of person that's constantly desiring sex and constantly working out and stuff. That's really unrealistic. So if you would like, go ahead and see if you can look up a positive, wholesome video for testosterone. Let me know if you find something, because I couldn't. Here we've got a slide from the textbook that walks you through different reasons why you may have sex. It kind of goes through a lot of the same stuff that I was just talking about, so go ahead and look at that on your own time. Next, let's talk about sexual dysfunction. Sexual dysfunction is a problem that impairs your ability to have sex or to get aroused for sex or to enjoy sex. And this is the first time that we're looking at the word dysfunction, or as any sort of dysfunction, and I really want to make sure that this point is put across clearly. There's no such thing as being normal. There is only having a problem. So regardless of how you like to have sex or what arouses you, unless it's something that is illegal, unless it is something that is really socially terrible, you do not have a problem unless you have a problem. And so something that is illegal, I promise you, is a problem, but also something that prevents you from enjoying your life in a healthy way is a problem. If you have unique kinks, it's perfectly fine. There's no such thing as being normal, as long as there's no problem, there's no illegality to it. So let's talk about some types of sexual dysfunctions, and notice that each one of these is associated with a clear problem. A problem, bear in mind, is something that either you identify as something that's making you unhappy, or that we as scientists know can make you unhappy, and maybe you are just not noticing, or you're unwilling to recognize that it's making you less happy. So erectile disorder, the inability to develop or maintain an erection. So this is probably the biggest, most commonly talked about sexual dysfunction, because there is a lot of medication for erectile disorder. There are a lot of reasons why erectile disorder may happen, and a lot of times the medications do not address the real underlying problem. So erectile disorder can be caused by cardiovascular health issues. If you get winded, you will not be able to maintain an erection. If you are overly stressed or anxious, and whoops, I forgot a parenthesis there, it will be difficult for you to maintain an erection. And so sex is something that is very personal. A lot of people are afraid of having sex or avoid having sex totally sober because of the anxiety associated with that. Another cause for erectile disorder is actually too much masturbation. It can be difficult to maintain an erection if you have ejaculated too many times, or you're used to masturbating a certain way, and so the stimulation you get from sex is not working for you. Luckily, the fix for all of these is pretty straightforward. If you masturbate too much, slow that down or stop it altogether. If you're getting winded too easily, exercise and try and lose some weight. If you have emotional problems, the most important thing is to talk to your partner. Talk to somebody about this. Remember that sex is not a contest. It is not something that you do to achieve an end goal. You should always go into sex not wanting to ejaculate or not wanting to have an orgasm, but instead just wanting to have fun, and without trying to be too personal. I can promise you that some of the best sexual interactions I have had have been ones that did not reach the conclusion of an ejaculation, but that were instead just enjoyable. So they involved a lot of exploration about who I am as a person and what I enjoy, and so you as a person with your partner should be open to experiencing just who you are and what works for both of you. Premature ejaculation is another very commonly talked about problem. There's not necessarily, I don't think there's really medication for this one. Premature ejaculation is where you just ejaculate too soon or sooner than desired, and it's most often psychological in nature. How do you deal with ejaculating too early? A lot of times what's going on there is that there's some psychological problem. It may be that you're anxious. It may be that you're not going through sex in an intelligent way. A lot of men want to kind of go at sex as hard and fast as possible from the beginning, and so that's actually really not a very fun thing to do for either yourself or your partner. A better choice is to make sure that you have some amount of foreplay. Talk to your partner about what you enjoy and what you don't enjoy, and I promise that a slow ramping up is always going to be more enjoyable than a quick, rapid activity, unless that's what you're doing, which can also be enjoyable, but not every single time. Just to give you an example of that, I believe the average time that women report as being an ideal length of sex was somewhere, I think it was 25 minutes, somewhere between 23 and 27 minutes. So, as a man, it's important to be aware that going at it as hard and fast as you can from the beginning is really maybe a mistake. Unless that's kind of what you guys like. Talk about it. Connect. Don't just do things. Female orgasmic disorder is another sexual dysfunction. Basically, women may have difficulty achieving orgasm or may have difficulty having sex. Excuse me. I apologize for that. I don't know why I always get burpy whenever I'm making these videos. There are many ways in which women have trouble having sex. There are a number of sexual dysfunctions that women can have just like men. The reason I presented these three is because they are the most common. But I would really encourage you to consider checking out this website here. They have information on the list of different sexual disorders as well as where they come from and how to deal with them. As always, the way to deal with them is not medication. That is a short-term stopgap solution. The best thing to do is to converse and learn and talk and work together and figure out ways to just enjoy your sex life instead of trying to accomplish sex. Okay. So sexual wellness is something that I kind of just went through all along already. I'm going to go through this slide efficiently. Communication is key to sexual wellness. Listening to your partner and being accepting. I promise you that the sexiest thing you can be is enthusiastic. It's very important as a partner to clearly say what you like and dislike, what feels good and doesn't feel good, what turns you on and turns you off. Cooperation is very important to sex. If you take turns, you can go longer and you can have a more enjoyable sexual activity because, well, we just talked about getting winded makes it harder to have sex. So if you take turns, you don't get winded as soon. Sex is not a test or a contest. It's not you're never trying to show how good you are at sex. You're just trying to have a good time and try and make sure your partner has a good time too. Avoid focusing on climaxing. We already talked about that. There's a lot more to sex than just the sex acts. For example, touching and cuddling, talking of foreplay, even laughing, making jokes, or enjoying things that you may be surprised about. It can be a real good way to enjoy having sex. And one of the most important things I can tell you about having positive, beneficial, meaningful sex is to be vulnerable. Let yourself be out there with someone. We've already talked about that kind of in the previous chapter with your ability to have basic trust, but I want to reiterate that here. And I do want to present the idea that there is absolutely nothing wrong with masturbation unless it is inhibiting your ability to have sex and enjoy your sex. So for people who have premature ejaculation problems, something that can be part of your solution is to masturbate sometimes. Again, communication and working with your partner is definitely going to be your best choice. Feel free to check out that link here for more information. Next up, I've got a couple videos talking about sexual disease and some mistakes in our society of how we think about sex. I'd really like to encourage you guys to check these videos out. I'll give you a moment to pause this one and go ahead and give them a watch. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Moving on. Let's talk about pornography and sexual assault. So, question: is porn bad for society? We just talked about how masturbating is a healthy thing to do unless you're doing it so much that you can't enjoy your sexual activity. But is porn something that is bad for a society? So there are kind of two sides to this question. Here's one side. Pornography availability reduces sexual assault. In countries where porn is illegal or inaccessible, there are higher rates of sexual assault. And so we know that the availability of pornography kind of acts as an outlet for people's sexual frustrations. A number of people believe that pornography can be harmful to a society for a couple of different reasons, and there is truth to that. So violent pornography can desensitize you to sexual assault and reduce satisfaction. So if you focus on violent pornography, you may get an idea of what sex should be like. And really, if all of your learning about sex comes from porn, you may have the wrong idea of what sex is actually like. Just like if all of your ideas about your body come from television, you may have the wrong idea of what your body should be like. If all of your ideas about romance come from movies, you'll have the wrong idea about what romance is supposed to be like. So, pornography can give you wrong ideas of what sex should be like, and especially violent pornography can make you less sensitive to sexual assault, more willing to accept sexual assault, either as the person who perpetrates it or as the person who receives it, which both are very, very unfortunate cases. And of course, sex can reduce satisfaction because you have this idealized version of sex in your mind that really is nonsensical. Please, if you're interested in these ideas, go ahead and click on the link here and find out more about how sex reduces sexual assault. And there is another link here at the end of the slide talking about how sex can desensitize you and why violent porn can be bad. Okay, so what does porn do? Here's a nice clean scientific sentence for you. Men and women become aroused when they see, hear, or read erotic material. Thank you, research papers. It's very important that I had a scientist or set of scientists say that for me. I really don't think that I need to do that. I think I included this here because this is one of those times when I was reading the textbook and I just kind of went, duh. So we just talked about the unreasonable ideas that you get about sex from pornography, as well as the unreasonable ideas that you get about your body from the media. So let's give that a concrete term. Overexposure to pornographic material can cause habituation. Habituation is a broader term that just means getting used to something and therefore having a reduced response to that thing. So you can habituate to, over here on the right, these images of what the media kind of portrays that girls and guys should look like. Of course, this is a meme that's a little bit sarcastic, just saying that, oh, guys have body image problems too. I think it's kind of funny. The idea that guys have body image problems, I think, is maybe a little bit of a newer one. It's a little bit less of a talked about one, and I do think that the problems associated with body image are worse for women because there are clear studies about that, but maybe that we don't have enough information about how body image issues affect guys. To summarize, that when you see this over and over and over again, you get used to it and you start to assume that this is what is normal, and so you may not notice that it's crazy. To go back to porn, too much porn can harm your sex life. We already kind of talked about that. Daily exposure to sex in the media can make you less sensitive to sex. You may enjoy your sex less if you are constantly seeing sex in music videos and on TV and stuff like that. And of course, you can get to the point where you have unrealistic standards or ideas about how sex should go or what constitutes a sexy man or woman. Next up, let's talk about sexual orientation. So, how many people do you think are homosexual? And the reason I have these caveat little stars here for you is because I want to make one point clear. As far as I know, the LGBTQ part of our society does not particularly favor the word homosexual anymore, because the word homosexual has been associated to a lot of negativity and abuse, derogatory remarks, and so in my experience, a better term would be gay and lesbian people is more accepted and more friendly towards the LGBTQ community, but please let me know if you have experiences that lead you to believe otherwise. I just want to make sure that, if you're not connected to this community, that you have that opportunity to learn about it. So, how many people do you think are part of the gay or lesbian community, sexually or romantically attracted to the same gender? It's important that we define being homosexual or being gay/lesbian. A lot of people overblow the percentage. The actual percentage is about 2 to 4% of the United States population. I believe that it's a little bit more. There are more gay guys than there are lesbian women, but I might have that one backwards. So sorry about that. I'll double check on that. Influences on sexual orientation. Why are people gay or lesbian? Why do people get that? Well, there is a number of reasons why. Of course, there are social aspects to it and there are genetic aspects to it, but there's no one answer. There's no such thing as a single gay gene, and there's no such thing as one person or one experience that makes you a gay or lesbian person. There's nothing that directly causes that. There's the erroneous belief that people who are sexually assaulted in their youth become gay or lesbian as they get older. That's not really the case at all. There are some things that we can point to, but the answer to why people are gay or lesbian may be a pretty hard question to answer. We know that homosexuality runs in families, so there's some genetic component to it. There is an older brother effect, so boys who have an older brother tend to have a higher likelihood of being gay, but that's just like the tip of the iceberg. There has to be more that we can learn about that, and right now it's just maybe too complicated of a subject that we haven't really been able to delve into it very well yet. There's no evidence that sexual orientation can be changed. So you may have heard about camps where boys are taught to be straight. That is nonsensical and harmful. Trying to be someone that you are not will only get you to a place where you are frustrated and unhappy and mentally unwell. Same thing, there are a number of other therapies, some of them pretty absurd and crazy, like electroshock therapy to stop people from being gay or lesbian. That is another just abhorrent thing that you do to someone. Electroshock therapy has its uses, but it is a last option for really, really major problems. Being a gay or lesbian person is not a problem. Okay, so let's talk about respecting each other. This is the last slide here, and it's an important slide. I've mentioned a lot of different ways that you can respect yourself and respect each other, communication and acceptance and tolerance being the most important of those ways, but there are things that we can do as people to be friendlier to each other, to be good to each other. So one of those is to try and use person-first language. Person-first language is language that puts a person before their classification status or diagnosis. Person-first language is most often associated to people who have different impairments, so you wouldn't say, you wouldn't mention a person as the wheelchair person, you would mention someone as the person who uses a wheelchair. By doing so, you make sure that they are a person first and a wheelchair using person second. Something similar can happen if you are talking about people in the LGBTQ community. It's a bad idea. It's pretty dang disrespectful to reference folks as being gays, but instead better to make sure you say as a gay person or a gay friend. So there you go. I can promise you that there is no one-size-fits-all answer to respecting each other, but the most important thing is that if you try to respect a person, and you try to respect people and communicate, folks will respond positively. If you ever feel that you are not sure about how to relate to someone, the best thing to do is ask. The best thing to do is say, hey, I'm trying to be respectful, but I know that I don't know, so can we have a conversation about that? One of the things that I'm seeing more and more often right now is people putting their pronouns in their emails, which some time ago I thought was kind of annoying. I thought it was unnecessary, but as I've grown older, as I've matured into someone who respects people more, I understand now that it really is a wonderful thing to put your pronouns down on your email. Why do pronouns matter? Well, people in the LGBT community face a lot of discrimination. right? And so if you are someone who identifies as a male, but you are constantly called she, it makes sense that anyone would feel distressed. I am not in the LGBTQ community, but if someone was constantly mistaking my gender and calling me she, I might start to feel a little bit distressed. I might start to feel insecure about myself. And so by putting your pronoun in your business card or your email, or your pronouns in your business card and your email, it's just a friendly way to say, hey, this is how I prefer to be referred to. And there is also nothing wrong with not having your pronouns there. Not everyone does not have to have them there. Um, if you are a person for whom that's not an issue, then you don't have to have your pronouns there. I will say that including your pronouns in your email is something that is beneficial for the community at large, because it makes it normal. It normalizes it. It makes it feel as though it's okay to say, hey, make sure that you please try and reference me by this or that gendered pronoun. Last thing here on this slide, I've got perceptions of discrimination, a graph that shows whether or not people feel as though their sexual orientation has been discriminated against in some way. So let's take a look here. So I believe this is all about folks who are in the LGBTQ community. And just to clarify, LGBTQ stands for lesbian, gay, bi meaning that their sexual orientation goes towards both genders. They are attracted to men and women. Trans refers to, we already talked about this, trans refers to a person that has differing sex and gender combination. Queer is an umbrella term that refers to anyone with a sexual orientation or a sex and gender pairing, or a gender that just does not fit under the normal, sorry, my mistake, under the common terms. Once again, normal does not mean, there's no such thing as normal, and so I try to avoid using the word normal, but it'll still happen sometimes. Sorry about that. So feel free to peruse this chart. I'll read the first one here for you just to make sure that you're aware of how to read it. So it says here 58% of LGBTQ people have experienced slurs or jokes in reference to their LGBTQ status in the past year. 58% of them have experienced this recently, 16% in the past year, or 43% in their lives. Down here, 21% of people in the LGBTQ community have been treated unfairly by an employer, 5% in the last year, 16% in their lives. So these figures are good because it's nice to see that we may take this to mean that the amount of discrimination is going down over time, but clearly there is still some work to do there. So what did you think about this chapter? Was there anything that was uncomfortable for you? Did you learn anything? Is there anything that you would like to tell me? This is probably the chapter that I was most trying to be careful about, because these are some very important subjects, and I know that I can't speak for everyone because I am not a lady. I am not part of the LGBTQ community, and I am only 26 years old, so I haven't experienced everything out there. Of course, talking about sex is always something that's going to be rough for people, but let me know what you think. Let me know how you felt. Did you feel as though we talked about these topics in a responsible, respectful way, or was there something that you disagreed with that maybe I could have done better? So thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the chapter, and I hope you took something out of it, and have an absolutely wonderful day.